and find him, though he is not far from any of us. But in the patriarchal age, we quickly learned that being in the presence of holy God means that we have to recognize his holiness and his authority. This was developed more clearly in the Mosaic age. When we come to God, we do so in his terms, and it has to be in holiness. And so when we come to Exodus 25, we are now in the Mosaic age. The people of Israel had spent their time in Egypt. God had raised up Moses, and he had brought them through on dry land, through the Red Sea on dry land. And now they're in the wilderness, and God is making for himself a holy nation. And there's going to be certain laws that will make them holy, separate, different than the rest of the world. And we also read, when we come to chapter 25, that it was time to build a sanctuary. So I like to call on people to read. And so if there's anybody who would read for me verses 1 through 9, Exodus 25, we're going to start there. And I'll just tell you, we're going to start kind of slow, and we're going to speed up, and we're actually going to go through the rest of Exodus tonight. So it's going to go very fast in just a little while. So Exodus 25, 1 through 9. Anybody want to read? Nick.
The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the people of Israel that they take from me a contribution. From every man whose heart moves him, you shall receive the contribution for me. And this is the contribution that you shall receive from them: gold, silver, and bronze, blue and purple and scarlet yarns, and fine twined linen, goat's hair, tanned ram skins, goat skins, acacia wood, oil for the lamps, spices for the anointing oil, and for the fragrant incense, onyx stones, and stones for setting, for the ephod and for the breastpiece. And let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell in their midst, exactly as I show you concerning the pattern of the tabernacle and of all of its furniture, so you shall make it."
All right, thank you. Good job. So now God is speaking to Moses, and Moses is the mediator. He already gave the law of the Ten Commandments to Moses, and now he's speaking through Moses again, and he's saying, tell the children of Israel to do this, and they're going to make this offering, and it's going to be from their own will. They're going to give what they want from their heart, and it's these precious metal and bronze and gold and silver, and there's these purple threads of blue and purple and scarlet and fine linen and all of these great things. And then when we come to verse 8, let them make me a sanctuary. That's an interesting thing to say. In some of your footnotes or something, it may say, let them make me a sacred place. That's what this means. And so there's a Hebrew word for sanctuary, and it means a sacred place. And this appears first a few chapters earlier in Exodus chapter 15. In Exodus chapter 15, Moses and the Israelites had crossed the Red Sea. And when they crossed the Red Sea on dry land, the sea came back over and wiped out the Egyptian army. And Moses pens this song, and in this song, Moses writes, "Who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like you, glorious in holiness, fearful in praise, doing wonders? You stretched out your right hand, the earth swallowed them. In your mercy, you in your mercy led forth the people you have redeemed. You have guided them in your strength to your holy habitation." So they were going to a place, to God's holy habitation. They were looking for this place, and they were headed there, and this is the reason for Moses' singing. They're on their way. And then in verse 17, we read, "You will bring them in and plant them." It's interesting how planting comes in again, right? I mean, first, God planted a garden, put the man and woman there, and then they planted a garden and made gods out of the garden that they planted. He says, "You will bring them in and plant them in the mountain of your inheritance, in the place, O Lord, which you have made for your own dwelling." And that is the word sanctuary, the Hebrew word for sanctuary there, sacred, holy place. And so it sounds like this is almost or maybe a prophetic message. Now, 10 chapters later, God is going to instruct them what this sanctuary will be, the one that they will build for him. And so it's going to be, first of all, because of the name, it's going to be sacred. It means holy or consecrated. It deals with being hallowed or set apart. Something that is set apart for a specific use. And this illustration is pretty common. It's like the good set of dishes that you have that you only use for Thanksgiving or Christmas or when company comes over. Otherwise, we're not supposed to touch it. It's just we could say it's set apart for that purpose, right? Or holy matrimony. This is wedlock where two people are set apart for each other to be shared with nobody else. It's holy. It's just between those two, and we're not to share each other with anybody else. And so this is a sacred place for God, and it's going to come by His instructions and so on. And so in verse 9, according to all that I show you, and I think Nick said exactly like I showed you, exactly like I showed you. And there's going to be a pattern we find in verse 9, and it's not only going to be a pattern for the temple, it's going to be a pattern for the utensils, all of the furnishings that are in the temple, tabernacle. And so the word tabernacle comes up there. And this is a portable sanctuary, a portable sacred place called the tabernacle or tent of meeting. And there's a Hebrew word for this, and it simply means a dwelling place, especially a tent as like a shepherd's hut. And so, shepherds are nomadic. They take their sheep various places, wherever they're going to find the green pastures. And in the places that they sleep, they would have to take their places down and put them up here and there, so kind of like a tent. And so shepherds being nomadic dwelt in tents, and this is associated with the word tabernacle. And so in this, God is expressing Himself to Israel, and by extension to the whole world in this tabernacle. And it's going to be a reminder to Israel as they travel through this wilderness, they will have hope because God will be with them. He will be there. And it will be a reminder that Israel's shepherd is among them in this wilderness. So without getting ahead, does anybody have anything they want to share from verses 1 through 9? Any other thoughts come to mind in this passage? We're going to see a little bit later that it's quite an amazing thing that even after all the things mankind had done, God reaches out to have them come back into His presence. Bruce.
A list of things of value. Goat hair almost made me laugh. I'm sure they had many uses for goat hair back then. But, things of value.
Yeah, I'm not sure how it was used. There's a few other things in there, too, that were not translated not easy to translate. For example, we have in verse 5, ram skins dyed red. And then some versions read badger skins. And there's some other really strange things that it reads there because it was really hard to translate. Does somebody have something else besides badger skins there?
Mine is it's translated, are you talking about where it says ram skins or goat skins?
Badger skins. Ram skins dyed red, and then badger skins and acacia wood.
Okay, mine says goat skins, and there's a footnote, and it says uncertain, possibly dolphin skins.
Yeah. And what did yours say? Sea cow. Okay. What was yours? Porpoise, yeah, or dolphins, yeah. So it was really hard to translate, and I don't think we really know. It's like Nick's footnote says, it's uncertain what this was. Yeah, likely was for weatherproofing because it was, after all, a tent, and it would be in the weather and so on. Yep, I've read that. We're going to talk more about these furnishings shortly. So after we read about the command to build the sanctuary, the next thing that we read about in verses 10 through 22 of the same chapter is the Ark of the Covenant, or the Ark of Testimony. And so, again, in verse 9, we find that there was a pattern for all of its furnishings. So that means that there's going to be a pattern for the Ark of Testimony, or the Ark of Covenant also. And so verses 10 and 11, we read about the materials that it was built out of. Acacia wood overlaid with pure gold. It was going to be constructed in such a way that was very specific. 2.5 cubits by 1.5 cubit by 1.5 cubit. Now, the International English Bible translates that into the English measurements. That would be 3 3/4 feet long by 2 1/4 feet wide by 2 1/4 feet high. So you know, something like about this. And that's the size, the dimensions. In verses 16 and 21, we find at least what, at first, the contents were going to be. The testimony of the Lord. And I guess that's all that was in there, but there's different kinds of testimony, I suppose. So we can talk about that maybe a little bit later. In verse 17, we read about the mercy seat. That's a very interesting thing, the mercy seat. There's a Hebrew word for mercy seat or place of atonement. In fact, the New American Standard Version writes, instead of mercy seat, it uses the word the atoning cover. This was the top of the Ark of the Covenant. And there's some interesting shadowing going on here, I think. Cherubim of gold was to be put on it. It was to be pounded out and to be cherubim of gold with their wings touching each other, and it appears like their face would be down facing the testimony that's inside. And so these cherubim were cherubim of gold. And it's interesting because, remember in Genesis 3, we read about this last week in 24, the cherubim was placed at the east of the Garden of Eden to guard the way to the tree of life. When they were kicked out of the garden, they couldn't go back in. And there was a cherubim there with the flaming sword guarding the way. So now the symbols of cherubim are placed on the mercy seat. Perhaps this is a reminder that coming into the presence of God is a serious and holy event. This was also where the priest would sprinkle blood on the Day of Atonement, symbolically reconciling Jehovah to his people. So once the tabernacle is built and is placed in the most holy place behind that veil, it's where the priest would go in and he would sprinkle the blood that would symbolically give reconciliation to Jehovah and the people. So it was appropriate then that this would be called the mercy seat or the atoning cover, because without mercy given by an atoning sacrifice, nobody could come into the presence of God. In fact, when we come to the New Testament, there's this passage in Romans chapter 3. You know the first part of it, probably have it memorized. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, being justified freely by his grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus, whom God set forth as a propitiation by his blood. So it's his blood that is the atonement and reconciles us to God. But that word propitiation, I know you probably can't read that. There's a Greek word that is the Greek word for the Hebrew word mercy seat. In fact, in Hebrews chapter 9 and 5, the same Greek word is used and it's translated as mercy seat. And then in Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 9, the Bible claims that these things were symbolic for the present time. So in other words, the holy sanctuary, the ark, the mercy seat, and all these other furnishings we're going to read about was foreshadowing the reconciliation brought through Christ. And this was generations before Christ came. So we're reading this as a narrative, not to be just chunked up from one story and set by itself. This is the Bible explaining God's presence with man and man with God. So this also, of course, in this holy place with the cherubim there, is where God would meet with the high priest there at the mercy seat. And so if you come to verse 22, that's where God says, "There I will meet with you, and I will speak with you from above the mercy seat, from between the two cherubim which are on the ark of the testimony, about everything which I will give you in commandment to the children of Israel." So this was one of the furnishings. That was the ark of testimony, the ark of covenant. In verses 23 through 29, we read about the table of showbread. We read about the construction of it, the sizes, the material. Again, acacia wood, pure gold, the items, the utensils that it holds, and so on. In verses 31 through 40, we read about the gold lampstands, the construction of it and the kind of craftsmanship that goes into it. The materials, again, are going to be pure gold. We're going to read about the arrangements of the lamps and the utensils associated with it, such as the gold wick trimmers. And then in verse 40, the last verse here, in verse 40, we read this again. "And see to it that you make them according to the pattern which was shown you on the mountain." This is what God had told Moses on the mountain. And so already we've read a couple of times where Moses is being instructed, make this the way that I tell you, according to the pattern that I give you. All right, so that's chapter 25 very quickly. And I know we're not going over it verse by verse, but I'm telling you what's there and giving you the places so that you can look it up on your own and fact check me if you want to. In Exodus 26, we come to the next chapter. We read about the decorations of the tabernacle. In verses 1 through 17, we read about the ornate curtains of blue and purple and scarlet. They're specific in size and color, the loops that are in them, the class, the material, the quantity, the placement in the tabernacle, and what to do with the remnants and where to hang them. It's all in there. It's very, very specific. In verses 18 through 29, we read about the boards of acacia wood with specific lengths and widths, joining techniques, the way that they were to join them together, certain techniques for doing that, with specific sockets made of silver, and the quantities and placement of the bars, and to pass the bars that were to pass through the boards and the direction with which they were to pass through. All of that is in detail right there. And then in verse 30, we read about the raising of the temple according to a specific plan. Look at 26 and verse 30. And you shall raise up the tabernacle according to its pattern, which you were shown on the mountain. So there's even instructions on how this is supposed to be put up. And you got to do it according to the pattern. Verse 30. Verse 31 through 33, we read about hanging the veil of fine woven linen with blue and purple and scarlet thread, with the artistic design of cherubim in them also, and how they were to hang it. Very specific. In verse 34 through 37, when all of this was complete, then and only then can they bring the Ark of Testimony into its specific place, the most holy place, and do it in a specific way, in a specific direction, and then place the rest of the furnishings in their places on the outside. That's a quick review of chapter 26. This is all about this special sacred place that God is having them build. We come to chapter 27, and we read about the altar of the burnt offering. I probably could have spent a lot of time on this, but we read kind of quickly in verses 1 through 8 in chapter 27 about the material that's to be used for the altar of burnt offering. Again, acacia wood, which I understand is a very hard and resilient wood, and I think it's from a tree that flowers. But this acacia wood is overlaid with bronze in this case. And all the utensils, the fire pans, the ash pans, the shovels, the grate, the poles, all are of bronze, which kind of makes sense that it's not gold, as it would melt. So in verse 1 through 8, we read about the altar of burnt offering. In chapter 27, verses 9 through 19, we read about the court of the tabernacle. It's specific in size, and the hangings as the walls were made of fine linen, 100 cubits long and 50 cubits wide, with pillars that have bands of silver hooks, sockets of bronze, along with pegs of bronze. In 27, verses 20 and 21, we read about the care for the lampstands. It's very specific about the fuel that they were to use and how long it was to be burning, actually continual. And so that's chapter 27. When we come to chapter 28, we begin to read about, and I know you can't read this is just kind of a quick visual that's not in great detail for you, but the garments of the priest. It's in great detail in chapter 28. In chapter 28, when we read about the garments of the priest, it tells us who can wear them. Only Aaron and his sons. The priests were Levites, descended from Levi and of the tribe of Levi, but among them, only Aaron and his sons were going to be the priests. So we read of there who can make them. We read about the gifted artisans or the craftsmen who were filled with the spirit of wisdom in verse 2. Notice, I'm in chapter 28, in verse 2. You shall make the holy garments for Aaron and your brothers for glory and beauty. In verse 4, you read about everything that's going to be part of this uniform. There's going to be a breastplate, an ephod, a robe, skillfully woven tunic, a turban, a sash. All of these things are symbolize something that's special. Not just everybody among the tribes are going to be wearing something like this, right? Because these people are set apart for the holy use at the temple. The rest of the chapter details how each of these garments or accessories were to be made, the materials used, the colors, the specific stones on the breastplates, where they were placed. The chains for the breastplates were made of pure gold. We read where the shoulder straps were to be placed and the material that was to be used for the shoulder straps. We read about the golden bells that were formed in the shape of pomegranates and placed all around the hem of the robe so that the priest would be heard when they were entering and when they were coming out of the holy place. And just to be clear, all of this was about God's holiness. So in verse 36, we read this, "You shall also make a plate of pure gold and engrave on it like the engraving of a signet, holiness to the Lord." Folks, we do not come to God in commonness. We approach holy God, who is God of heaven and earth, in hallowedness. That's why Jesus prayed, "Hallowed be your name." Finally, in the final verses, the priests were to be anointed and consecrated so that they would be sanctified to minister to the Lord. They would be consecrated by an anointing, and also they would have to wash. And then later we'll find out that they'd have to make some sacrifices too. So this was the consecration process, and that continued into chapter 29. We're going to fast forward a little bit to chapter 31. We're going to read about, or you'll notice, I'm not going to read the whole chapter. You'll notice about the craftsmen and the craftsmanship that went into building the temple. Let's read a few of these verses, though. If anybody wants to read, let's read verses 1 through 11. It's kind of a summary of what we've been through, though, already. So, chapter 31, 1 through 11. Does anybody want to read? Amos?
The Lord also spoke to Moses, "Look, I have appointed by name Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah. I have filled him with God's Spirit and with wisdom, understanding, and the ability in every craft, to design artistic works in gold, silver, and bronze, to cut gemstones for mounting, and to carve wood for work in every craft. I have also selected Aholiab, son of Ahishmaach, of the tribe of Dan, to be with him. I have put wisdom in the heart of every skilled artisan in order to make all that I have commanded you: the tent of meeting, the ark of the testimony, the mercy seat that is on top of it, and all the furnishings of the tent, the table with its utensils, the pure gold lampstand with all its utensils, the altar of incense, the altar of burnt offering with all its utensils, the basin with its stand, the specially woven garments, both the holy garments for the priest Aaron and the garments for his sons to serve as priests, the anointing oil and the fragrant incense for the sanctuary. They must make them according to all that I have commanded you."
All right, thank you. So as you read through this, what stands out to you? I know that we've been through a lot, and this is kind of a summary of all of the utensils and all of the materials that's going into this. Anything stand out to you as you read through this summary, Daryl?
In the wilderness. Where are they getting all this?
I'm going to get to that. Glad you said that. Yeah, that's an interesting answer to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where are they getting it? CJ.
Just according to everything I've commanded you, it's just over and over and over, according to that. That even goes when they set up the priesthood. God, Leviticus 8 and 9 will say that over and over, and then we get to chapter 10 and then the binders stick out because they did not do what God said. So.
Right. So that's a good point. According to all that I have commanded you, you shall do again and again and again.
The other thing is just the detail. I mean, it's like there's no room for improv. There's no, I mean, it is very, very specific. Each specific item and how it's being made. Not only how it's being made, but what it's supposed to look like. And what's amazing about it is Moses is supposed to remember all this, right? as I showed you. So somehow he's got to be able to convey to the people, you know, what it is that they're supposed to do. You know, I mean, think about the telephone game, you know, I mean, you know, all these people making stuff and, you know, so.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, you know, and Daryl's a builder, and he's talking about how specific everything is and how detailed it is. And there's no room for improv. You do it the way that it's supposed to be done, and there's a lot of details there. And his other point was that God told this to Moses. Now, Moses has to go take care of it. And so you think about this. Remember, God instructed Adam, and he didn't instruct Eve. And Adam really just had one major thing to remember, you know, don't eat from this tree. Had Adam done his responsibility well, they would have stayed in the garden where God met with them. Now, God is telling Moses, if the people are to approach him, they're to come close to God again, it'll be because God's mercy and because of Moses' ability to do his responsibility and to make sure that this is done the way that God said.
Interesting, Daryl kind of touched on it, how difficult this would have been, but it's not as if God is necessarily leaving them hung and dry either. He gives them the ability to do this. He says in verse 3, he says, "I've filled them with the Spirit of God, with ability and intelligence, with knowledge and all craftsmanship, to devise these artistic designs," and so on and so forth. Later, when he mentions this guy from the tribe of Dan, he says, "I've given to all able men ability that they may make all that I have commanded you." That's in verse 6, and in verse 7 he gets into everything.
Yeah.
And so it's not as if God is giving them these instructions and they're just impossible to do. Perhaps to a common person it would have been difficult, but God is not only showing them how to do it, but he's giving them the ability to do it as well. They just have to put the work in now.
Yeah, he enabled them to do it. Gave them the heart of wisdom. That's what my version says. And if you think about that, and not only the people who weren't the craftsmen, they willingly gave. I think that says a lot about the hearts of the people who were contributors and the people who were the builders. It wasn't just that they were doing it, they were doing it with the right intentions.
Have you ever been camping?
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, think about that. They were basically camping.
yeah.
And all of a sudden, you're given this charge to make all this just crazy stuff out of crazy materials, and yeah, I can't wait to hear what you have to say about
All right.
the guy.
Not just camping, but walking, wandering, and
Yeah, they're walking, they're wandering, they're taking this down, putting it up. It's heavy, it's cumbersome, and there's going to be, you know, we're not going to get into this, but there's very specific details of who's going to take it down, who's going to carry it, how they're going to camp around it. All of that is laid out. All right, let's move on. Let's go to chapter 38. We're going to speed up a little bit here. We're going to read about the materials in chapter 38, the materials that they had to build, had to use for this. And we're going to look down at verse 24. Verse 24 and 25. Chapter 38, 24, 25. "All the gold that was used in the work of the holy place, that is the gold of the offering, was 29 talents and 730 shekels, according to the shekel of the sanctuary." Verse 25. "And the silver from those who were numbered of the congregation was 100 talents and 1,775 shekels, according to the shekel sanctuary." So if you have my version, that really doesn't mean a lot, because I don't know what a shekel is, and so on and so forth. So I read the footnotes in the International English Bible, and it tells me that the total weight of gold was a little more than 1 ton. The total amount of silver was just over 3 3/4 ton. Now, there's hundreds of thousands of people, so you know, you break that up, it's not like they couldn't carry it. They could carry it. But where in the world did they get it? We know where that came from. Remember the story in Genesis chapter 15 where God speaks with Abraham, and he tells him, you're going to have descendants, they're going to go into this foreign land, and they're going to be there for 400 years, and then they're going to be released. And the nation, he says in Genesis 15 and verse 14, "The nation whom they serve I will judge. Afterwards they shall come out with great possessions." That's God's promise to Abraham. And then we fast forward through the exile, and we come to Exodus chapter 12, when they're after the death of the firstborn. And this is what we read. "Now the children of Israel had done according to the word of Moses, and they had asked from the Egyptians articles of silver, articles of gold, and clothing. And the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so they granted them the request. Thus, they plundered the Egyptians. They plundered them. They didn't raise the sword to plunder them. God just made it so that they needed them out, and they were willing to give them everything they had to just get out. They plundered the Egyptians. I think that's where they got their stuff. When they were leaving, they were saying, take it, leave, get out. The death of the firstborn had just taken place. And so there they are carrying all this around, and God's going to use the gold of Egypt to build his tabernacle. So that's that. Anybody else have a different idea on that? Where they got their material?
Verse 25?
I read verse 24 and 25. A talent is 75 pounds of gold. Yeah. Okay.
But now we've got all this fabric, specific colors of fabric, and we're not talking like enough to make up a few pieces of clothing.
Yeah.
You know, we're talking a lot of fabric.
Yeah. Yeah. Garfield?
I don't know exactly where it's at, but I know it was one time when they were taking out the collection, Moses had told them that they those who put together, they'd given it up. Right. You know. Turn them back.
I have a question about that. So, if they use the goods of Egypt, and Egypt was a place of slavery, will that make the objects unholy? Wait a minute. That will the using the items from a place of slavery and oppression, so would that make you see what I'm saying?
I think I see what you're saying. Just because they're using it from Egypt where they were idolaters and things, does this make it unholy? Obviously, if that's what they're using, it doesn't. Yeah, so again, your footnote said how much for the pounds of gold?
A
little over a ton. Okay, so it lines up with the other thing that I had read. I don't know why yours reads differently.
I did the math. I calculated because a talent is 75 pounds, so it's a little under 200 pounds of gold it would have been. I didn't calculate the silver. That was too much math.
A little over a ton. That's a lot of gold, isn't it? So if you were entering the tabernacle, you're seeing think that the curtains of blue and purple and scarlet and gold and silver and bronze. It's going to be a very bright, shiny place. Isn't it? All right, let's run up to Exodus chapter 40. Last chapter in the book. In Exodus 40, the tabernacle is erected, it's raised up, and it's arranged. So again, in verse 40, chapter 40, verse 1, the Lord spoke to Moses, and he told him what to do, and you shall bring in the ark of the testimony in verse 3, you shall bring in the table in verse 4, you shall also set the altar in verse 5, and so on, and it goes down. So they got all of these things done, they got them made, now they're setting it all up, and then they come to the priests, and the priests are to put on these garments, and they're to be anointed, and they're to be washed, and all of this in order to be consecrated. That's in verse 14, 15. Let's go to verse 16. Thus Moses did, according to all that the Lord commanded him. So he did. So all through this, we've been reading how that Moses was told, do this the way I command you, do this the way I command you, do this according to the pattern, do this according to the pattern. And we come to this passage, and Moses did it, according to all that the Lord had commanded him. And so this began a long time ago. You know, in chapter 25, the Lord said to Moses in verse 1, and then in verse 8 and 9, let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among them, according to all that I show you. That is the pattern of the tabernacle, and the pattern of all its furnishings, just so you shall make it. This is what God said, and this is what Moses done. He had faithfully carried out God's commandments, just as they were intended. Now let's go to verse 34 through 38. Everything's done. It's been raised up the way that it was supposed to be raised up. And now verse 34. Then the cloud covered the tabernacle of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the temple, or the tabernacle. And Moses was not able to enter the tabernacle of meeting because the cloud rested above it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Whenever the cloud was taken up from above the tabernacle, the children of Israel would go onward in their journey. But if the cloud was not taken up, then they did not journey till the day it was taken up. For the cloud of the Lord was above the tabernacle by day, and fire was over it by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel throughout all of their journey. And so now that it's done, we have this cloud and this fire, and the presence of the Lord is evident. The shepherd is leading them now in the wilderness. The invaluable presence of the Lord is obviously among them again. I want to leave you with this thought. In John chapter 1, in verse 14, we're introduced to the carnation, the manifestation of Jesus in the flesh. And it says that the Word, being Jesus, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we beheld His glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. That word phrase there, dwelt among us, is the Greek word for the Hebrew word tabernacle. And it means to dwell. You could read this very literally by saying that Jesus came and He tabernacled among us. He became the portable sanctuary, but He put on the shepherd's tent, and the people beheld glory again. And we know that sanctuary, Jesus, was also raised up. His holiness was marked by His essence and His conduct, not with fine linen, not with fine lumber, not enshrined with gold or silver or bronze. He was born into a manger and raised up on a Roman cross. He was raised up again to reign as high priest at the mercy seat of God, which was sprinkled with His very own blood, just as was prefigured so many generations ago in the book of Exodus. So we're going to study that further next week. Any last thoughts before we close? Nick?
For math. And this time I was curious about what the cost would have been of all of that gold. You think about, the value of someone's presence, and a lot of times you can't put a value on it, and you certainly cannot put a value on God's presence. But the value of the gold that they had would be about $95 million today. And that's just the gold. That's not including the silver.
Amos?
So Nick is showing off his math geekiness. I'd like to jump in. And when you talk about the dimensions of the ark, and if you 45 inches by 27 inches, when you will, if you take the ratio of the sides, the sum of those two dimensions, and divide it by the longer dimension, you'll get what they call the golden ratio, called the golden rectangle. And it's in the top, that's in the front, back, and the bottom. If you had a geometry teacher that would teach that golden ratio, it has a lot to do with a lot of things in nature, like the pattern of growth of cells and the Fibonacci sequence, and there's a lot of the stuff that's drawn from that ratio, and it's first seen here in the Bible, and it's the first time I really noticed it. I never brought that up in class because it never occurred to me until I was studying those numbers a little bit closer here, and I thought it might be. But the golden rectangle is used in a lot of different ways, but one of the interesting things about the golden rectangle, I'm sorry guys if this is boring you, but I had all the kids draw what you would say was the perfect rectangle, and they did. And then I said, now measure the side, you know, the length and the height of your rectangle, and then I had them put that in the ratio. And not everybody came up with the golden ratio, but when you average the whole class, you would come like within 100 or 200ths of the golden ratio, which was, if you just did a little study on that, it's kind of interesting how God gave those dimensions, and they are the dimensions that are found in nature. And
Seems like there's something divine about that, right? There is. Okay, Nick, do you have some announcements? All right, thanks, everybody.